Semiconductors or chips are basically the foundation of modern life. Virtually everything from missiles to toasters, fighter jets to refrigerators, smartphones to stock market run on semiconductors.
But what is the chip war?
They'll tell you they need chips.
For printing computer chips.
Just how important semiconductors are to both economic prosperity as well as national security in the United States.
AMD is one of the largest players in the global semiconductor industry, and all of these chips are manufactured by TSMC in China's Taiwan.
I think it's a recognition of just how important semiconductors are to both economic prosperity as well as national security in the United States.
Lisa Su is the CEO of AMD.
You're part, and so are you, Chip. Chip says, I know, and I don't even have to be told.
The US President Biden joked at the event.
We could have named them Chips and Science, but anyway.
He signed the $208 billion Chips and Science Act into law in 2022. Lisa Su was one of the people at the signing ceremony of the act. But now the CHIPS Act is asking TSMC to move its advanced production line to Arizona.
The chip war is another form of warfare by the US. Like many oil wars the US has launched in Iraq, Afghanistan, but not using firearms.
But how does the US play?
In the 1960s, the US chip companies started offshoring some production to Asia. Japan became the Asian factory for American chips designers. But in the 1980s, American businesses found themselves under siege because Japanese electronic companies could make memory chips faster and cheaper than US companies. The US launched a trade war with Japan, and the US picked China's Taiwan and South Korea as substitutes. They overtook Japan to become the world leading chip makers. In 1990, 37% of world semiconductors were made in the US. Now, the US market share is down to 12%. America is caught in a bind, being strong in design but far behind in manufacturing. During the same period, China's share of the sector rose from almost 0 to 15%.
That was unexpected. The US has started to take action like what they did to Japan in the 1980s.
A set of regulations came out, the CHIPS Act and export control rules, from $52 billion in industrial subsidies, an investment ban on China to restricting China getting advanced semiconductors and equipment.
But what's the difference between, like, say, the chips using weapons between the chips in my phone?
Okay, the chips used in the weapons, usually it will select the more stable and the security chips. Usually it will not use very advanced technology. Long time duration is more important for the military use.
And that's not as sophisticated as some of the new equipment.
United in terms of trying to stop China's.
Now, national security concern is like a basket, and the US politicians throw into it whatever they want. In recent years, Washington has repeatedly abused the concept of national security concern to disrupt the global semiconductor industry. In September, the US National Security Advisor Jack Sullivan said in a speech that the national security objective for export control is to maintain as large of a lead as possible in key technologies. That makes it quite clear that the national security concern is just an excuse for the US to contain other countries so that it can secure its leading position.
Countries named like United States and Europe, Japan, Korea, China, each country and area had their advantage in some point of the supply chain. So if you want to get rid of one country or one area, it will bring lots of impact, serious impact to the whole supply chain.
Here are the main stages in making a chip: design, front-end fabrication, and back-end assembly, testing, and packaging.
Yes, it took more than 1,000 processes for a single chip to get into your PC.
There is no single country can really realize their self-sufficiency for the semiconductor product supply. Globalization is the key, factor to support the semiconductor industry growth in the past 30 to 40 years.
If we want to re-establish a complete semiconductor supply chain in the United States, you will not find that to be a possible task.
We are the only provider on the planet of this critical technology.
ASML is caught in the middle of the China-US chip competition. It makes billions in sales in the Chinese mainland every year.
At first, we need to know why the US is pressuring other countries to adopt similar chip restrictions on China. Because if only the US adopted such restrictions, the US chip companies will risk losing the Chinese market to their rivals in Europe, South Korea, and Japan. We can see that will severely undermine the US chip industry's global presence and competitiveness, because the Chinese mainland is the world's largest semiconductor market. Last year, it imported more than $400 billion worth of chips.
Here are who really get rich from the chip ban: CEOs of the US chip companies, politicians in Congress, and arms dealers. Do you remember Lisa Su from AMD? Along with her, Patrick Gelsinger from Intel and a group of CEOs formed the Semiconductor Industry Association to facilitate lobbying on the CHIPS Act. The top US companies have spent about $20 million during the first half of 2022 alone. Intel Corp shelled out a record sum of $2 million during the third quarter this year to deploy lobbyists to Capitol Hill, the Pentagon, the Commerce Department, and the President Biden's office. That's roughly double the sum Intel spent during the same period last year. Intel is expected to be the biggest beneficiary of the act, raking in up to $15 billion. We obtained a secret file of Chuck Schumer's lobbyist contributions. Look at Alan Thompson, Intel's Vice President of US Government Relations. The name we also see in the filing. The Senate Majority Leader who was leading the passage of the CHIPS Act is favored by the K Street.
More than 3 dozen of his former aides reportedly work at lobbying firms.
In other countries, it would be described as bribery and corruption, but in the US, they call it lobbying.
The US Congress has been known for profiting from inside trading. This time is no different. Republican Michael McCaul, another major sponsor of the CHIPS Act and chairs the Hawkeye China Task Force in Congress, has traded at least $3 million in chip company stocks over the past 3 years.
In a recent blog post, the CSIS says the US defense depends on semiconductors and should take on the challenge from China.
Who pays their bill will give us a clue. CSIS is funded largely by arms dealers such as Raytheon, Boeing, and others. Why bother countering China when China's technology is lagging behind?